in search of a tasty snack have devastated lawns and playfields in western Washington. The Seattle Times report the irresistible treat is none other than larvae of the European chafer, an invasive scarab beetle. According to Patty Baker with Seattle's Department of Parks and Recreation, the grubs are a great source of protein and crows are filling up. The scarab beetle was first spotted in western Washington in 2008, and by 2016 they had taken up permanent residence near SeaTac Airport. The Seattle Parks Department is trying to figure out the ecologically benign way to keep its playfields healthy. In 1970 and the 80s, during the last big lawn invasion, the culprit was the European crane fly. Residents across the Northwest fought back with highly toxic pesticides that wound up running off into drains and poisoning birds. Today's pesticides are less toxic and, eventually the ecosystem will adjust and other natural predators and other factors combine to impose a type of equilibrium. But it's going to take some time for that natural thing to happen. Back to you.
Thanks. Pressure continues to mount on Mike Solon, the president of the Seattle Police Officers Guild, as 8 of the 9 members of the Seattle City Council called for his resignation this morning, following comments he made blaming, in part, Black Lives Matter activists for the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol. Mayor Jenny Durkin called last week for Solon to retract his words and apologize or resign. The Martin Luther King Jr. County Labor Council, which expelled the police union from its ranks in June amid the mass protests against police brutality, called for Solon's resignation, the Seattle Times reports. Asher, you're up.
Once seen as an essential way to expand COVID-19 testing to denser neighborhoods and residents without cars, Seattle's self-collected curative testing kiosks are now under increased scrutiny from the Food and Drug Administration for false negative results. Following the increase in demand for testing before the holiday season, the city announced a partnership with the company to give the city the capacity for an additional 3,500 daily tests. The walk-up kiosks, meant to serve dense areas where drive-through sites were not feasible, were deployed in early December in the Central District and Northgate neighborhood. 3 new kiosks in the North, Central, and South Seattle opened later in the month. The curative test was never approved by the FDA, but was granted emergency use authorization in April for symptomatic individuals, the Seattle PI reports. Russell?
Is it? No, I only had the one story.
No, you get it. All right. The body of a 65-year-old Eatonville woman was recovered from Mount Rainier National Park Sunday after an accidental fall. Per Como News, Constant Markham fell from a steep slope near Reese's Point in the southwest corner of the park Saturday afternoon. Searchers were able to locate her on Saturday and confirm that she was deceased. A ground team returned to the area Sunday and recovered her body using a helicopter. 22 National Park Service employees with assistance from 13 Mountain Rescue Association personnel and 1 person from Pierce County Fire District 23 worked to recover the body from the steep, hazardous terrain.
A second inmate at Aberdeen Prison has died from complications of COVID-19. Per Como News, the Stafford Creek inmate had been transferred to a healthcare facility after contracting the virus and died on Saturday. The State Department of Corrections has not released the prisoner's name. Prison officials report Stafford Creek has had 770 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the past 30 days out of the 1,830 inmates that are housed there. Prisoners have been on restricted movement since early December in an effort to prevent the virus's spread. The first inmate died on December 10th. This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. When we return with national news, we'll talk about Mississippi's new flag and more. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. This is a national news. California's coronavirus catastrophe reached a staggering new level Monday as Johns Hopkins University data showed the nation's most populous state has recorded more than 30,000 deaths since the pandemic started nearly a year ago. Deaths have exploded since the COVID-19 surge began in October. It took California 6 months to record its first 10,000 deaths. But in barely a month, the total rose from 20,000 to 30,000. Over the weekend, state officials reported a 2-day record of 1,163 deaths. Hospitalizations have also increased dramatically, with many now stretched to the limit. California ranks third nationally in coronavirus deaths, behind Texas and New York, which is in the number one position with nearly 40,000. Health officials have warned the worst is yet to come later this month when there's a full picture on infections from the holidays, AP reports.
The Trump administration is trying to push through a last-minute rule that could force banks to offer loans to gun makers, oil exploration companies, or to finance high-cost payday lenders. Per NPR, the move follows announcements by the biggest U.S. banks that there are some industries and activities they don't want to finance, such as drilling for oil in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge or making loans to gun manufacturers who make assault-style weapons. Some major banks have sworn off making those loans. The rule is based on the concept of fair access to credit, which traditionally had to do with preventing racial discrimination. Critics say the rule is really about forcing banks to finance firearms companies that make assault-style rifles, or even predatory payday lenders that charge 300% in annual interest.
President-elect Joe Biden's choice for U.S. Defense Secretary, retired General Lloyd Austin, stands to collect as much as $1.7 million connected with leaving Raytheon Technologies Corporation, an ethics disclosure showed on Sunday. If he resigns to take the Biden administration job, some of that stock will be sold on his behalf. He pledged to fully divest from Raytheon within 90 days of his confirmation, Austin said in filings posted by the U.S. Office of Government Ethics. He also agreed to recuse himself from some decisions involving the company for a year. Austin has more hurdles than usual to being confirmed for the post. He needs both the approval of the Senate for the job as well as separate congressional waiver since he retired from the military less than 7 years ago, Reuters reports.
Poised to impeach, the House sped ahead today with plans to oust President Donald Trump from office, worrying he is a threat to democracy and pushing the vice president and cabinet to act even more quickly in an extraordinary effort to remove Trump in the final days of his presidency. Trump faces a single charge, incitement of insurrection, after the deadly Capitol riot in an impeachment resolution that the House will begin debating on Wednesday. At the same time, the FBI on Monday a potential armed protest in Washington and many states by Trump loyalists ahead of President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration, AP reports. Pending impeachment, Democrats called on Vice President Mike Pence and the cabinet to invoke their constitutional authority under the 25th Amendment to remove Trump from office before Inauguration Day.
Parler, the messaging app favored by far-right activists, has filed a lawsuit against Amazon Web Services alleging antitrust and breach of contract, per NPR. The company is seeking a temporary restraining order to prevent Amazon from removing Parler from its servers. Amazon had told Parler it would suspend its account at 11:59 Pacific time on Sunday. The website has been offline since the deadline passed. Web hosting service cited free speech rights and damage to the company's reputation, the competitive standing. The social media site also noted that Amazon Web Services recently signed a long-term deal with Twitter, helping one of Parler's competitors deliver millions of tweets. Apple announced it was suspending Parler from its App Store, preventing users from downloading the app to their devices. Kendra.
All right. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves signed the new Ingani Trust flag into law. Per WLBT, lawmakers voted to retire the flag that bore the Confederate emblem. Voters then approved the new flag with the magnolia and the phrase "In God We Trust" back in November during the general election. The commission that selected the new flag joined Reeves as he signed the bill into law. The group poured through thousands of designs in 2020 before landing on the "In God We Trust" flag. A flag-raising ceremony was held outside the Mississippi State Capitol, along with Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann and House Speaker Philip Gunn.
Capitol Police Officer Eugene Goodman is being hailed for his role steering an angry mob away from the Senate chambers in Wednesday's storming of the U.S. Capitol. Per Reuters, Goodman put himself between a man wearing a black T-shirt for the QAnon conspiracy movement and a hallway leading to the Senate chambers, then shoves the person to induce him and the crowd to chase Goodman toward officers in the opposite direction. Trump, who has sought unsuccessfully to overturn his November 3rd election loss to Democrat Joe Biden, falsely claiming widespread fraud, has called on supporters gathered in Washington to protest the congressional counting of electoral votes certifying Biden's victory. 5 people, including a Capitol Police officer, died as a result of Wednesday's rioting, and dozens of people have been charged. This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio .world. When we come back with global news, you'll hear about the Pope's new decree and more. Stay tuned.
In Trump's final days, Israel orders more settler homes built. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered construction plans advanced on Monday on some 800 Jewish settler homes in the occupied West Bank, anchoring. Okay. Back to you, Kendra.
All right. So the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered construction plans advanced on Monday for some 800 Jewish settlers' homes in the occupied West Bank, anchoring the projects in final days of the pro-settlement Trump administration. Palestinians condemned such construction as illegal. The timing of the move appeared to be an attempt to set Israel's blueprint in indelible ink before Joe Biden, who has been critical of his settlement policies, becomes U.S. president on January 20th. Moving ahead with the projects could help shore up support for Netanyahu from settlers and their backers in the March 23rd election, Israel's fourth in 2 years, in which the conservative leader faces new challenges from the right. Per Reuters, most countries view Israeli settlements as violating international law, but Israel disputes this, citing historical and biblical links to the West Bank.
The United States has designated Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced the latest move in the final days of the Trump administration that observers say will complicate President-elect Joe Biden's foreign policy plans. In a statement on Monday, Pompeo said the U.S. was designating Cuba, quote, for repeatedly providing support for acts of international terrorism in granting safe harbor to terrorists. The report repeatedly cited Venezuela. The new move also, quote, restricts U.S. foreign assistance, bans defense exports and sales, and imposes certain controls on exports of dual-use items. Biden, who is set to be inaugurated on January 20th, plans to move Washington closer to normalized relations with Havana, Bloomberg reported earlier this month, including easing restrictions on travel, investment, and remittances.
Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador laid out plans to restructure the country's Freedom of Information Institute, along with the other autonomous watchdogs and regulators. Per Reuters, López Obrador has long criticized government watchdogs and regulators as a waste of budget better used for education and welfare. The government itself could handle public information requests without the need for a separate institution. The government was drawing up a formal proposal regarding INIAI as part of a wider administrative reform bill he wants to present to Congress by February. It was not clear if INIAI would be absorbed by government offices or if it would be restructured in entirety. Critics see the planned reform as an attempt to consolidate power, removing checks and balances and leaving the government to police itself, Article 19 of Freedom of Expression Observatory said eliminating the groups would be a, quote, serious setback in human rights. These organizations are and have been citizen tools to exercise key rights such as freedom of expression and the right to information, unquote.
The collapse of terrorism brings problems to Machu Picchu. Peru's tourism business could be down as much as 85% for 2020. The World Travel and Tourism Council estimates that the direct and indirect economic impact of tourism in Peru in 2019 was approximately 22 billion, or 9.3% of the country's gross domestic product. Per National Geographic, Cusco's airport received nearly 635,000 travelers in the first 2 months of 2020, up 16% from the same period in 2019. Then COVID-19 happened. Over the next 8 months, the number was only 231,726. Tourism visits the Machu Picchu, the Inca ruins that ruined tourism in Cusco, and drew foreign travelers to Peru in general, were down 72% in the first half of the year. The site was receiving around 500 people a day in December, nearly all of them Peruvian tourists, down from more than 2,500 during normal times. The government estimated the entrance fee to Machu Picchu for Peruvians to stimulate domestic tourism. The site received 1.6 million tourists in 2019.
Pope Francis, in another step towards greater equality for women in the Roman Catholic Church, on Monday changed its law to allow them to serve as readers at liturgies, altar servers, and distributors of communion. In a decree, the Pope formalized what has already been happening in many countries for years. With the change in the Code of Canon Law, conservative bishops will not be able to block women in their dioceses from the rolls. However, the Vatican stressed that the roles were, quote, essentially distinct from the ordained ministry and were not an automatic precursor to women one day being allowed to be ordained priests. In an accompanying letter, the Pope said he wanted to bring, quote, stability and public recognition, unquote, to women already serving in the roles, Reuters reports. Now, wait. This is news on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. When we come back with sports, we'll talk about the fabulous Browns' victory over the Steelers and more. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio World. This is sports news. The Seahawks fall to the Rams. The Rams are moving on to the NFC playoffs at the expense of the Seahawks. Per Patch.com, Cam Akers rushed for 131 yards and a touchdown. Darius Williams returned Russell Wilson's interception for 42 yards for a score, and the Rams beat the Seahawks 30-20 in the NFC wildcard playoff game Saturday. The best defense in the league during the regular season carried its dominance into the playoffs. Even while missing unanimous all-pro tackle Aaron Donald for much of the second half, no team was better at limiting yards or points than the Rams. 11-6 was the record, and they continued to torment Wilson and the Seahawks with the 12-5 record. Seahawks quarterback was under siege from the defensive front and secondary that minus one player never let DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett break loose. Donald, before leaving with a rib injury, and Jalen Ramsey was superb. But so were other role players such as Troy Reader and Jordan Fuller and Leonard Floyd. You can listen to the full breakdown of the game later on Monday Night Sports.
Washington State has entered the Associated Press Women's College Basketball Poll at number 25. Per Como News, the ranking comes a day after Washington State beat the then number 7 Arizona 71-69 in overtime on a buzzer-beating layup by freshman Charlize Lager-Walker. Washington State, 7-1, has won 5 of its first 6 Pac-12 games for the first time since the 2013-2014 season. While Washington State was enjoying its first ranking, Stanford tightened its grip on the number 1 spot in the poll. The Cardinal received 29 of the 31st place votes from a national media panel. They were followed by Louisville, North Carolina State, UConn, and South Carolina. The Wolfpack received the other number one vote. Not much was expected from the Cougars this season, who were picked last in the Pac-12 preseason polls by the media and coaches. It's the first time since the 2014-2015 season that they have 2 wins over ranked opponents. The lone loss came by 4 points to Oregon.
The Browns dismantled the Pittsburgh Steelers 48-37 in the wild card round Sunday night, picking up the franchise's first postseason victory in more than a quarter century and earning a trip to Kansas City next Sunday to face the defending Super Bowl champions. Playing with head coach Kevin Stefanski, Pro Bowl guard Joel Bitonio, and top cornerback Denzel Ward back in Cleveland after all tested positive for COVID-19, Cleveland raced to the biggest first half by a road team in NFL playoff history, then held on. The victory was the Browns' first postseason triumph of any kind since beating the New England Patriots on New Year's Day in 1995, and their first playoff win in the road since December 28th, 1969, AP reports.
Trump to give Belichick with Presidential Medal of Freedom. President Donald Trump will present one of the nation's highest civilian honors to Bill Belichick, the football coach of the New England Patriots, and the only coach to win 6 Super Bowl titles. The presentation of the Presidential Medal of Freedom is expected Thursday. A White House official confirmed on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the matter publicly, AP reports. Trump and Belichick have known each other for several years, with Trump before his campaign victory in 2016. Reading a letter of praise from Belichick at a New Hampshire rally, Belichick said afterward he was not a political person and that he had a friendship and loyalty to Donald.
The NBA called off 2 more games because of COVID-related and contract tracing issues on Monday, and the Miami Heat were preparing to be without 8 players for several days because of possible exposure to the coronavirus. Monday's game in Dallas between the Mavericks and the New Orleans Pelicans was postponed by the league, as well as Tuesday's matchup in Chicago between the Bulls and the Boston Celtics, AP reports. The latest postponements came one day after Miami's game in Boston was called off because of contract tracing issues with the Miami Heat. The Celtics would have been without 7 players for the virus-related issues for that game. Miami's Avery Bradley, who did not play in the NBA's restart bubble last season out of concern about exposure to the virus, was also ruled out of that game because of the protocols.
Now it's time to go over tonight's show plugs. Analyzing the Seahawks season-ending loss to the Rams in the wildcard round on Monday Night Sports, live at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time on Rainier Avenue Radio, hosted by Rick Dupree and Seahawks legend Edwin Bailey.
Rainier Avenue Radio is the premier broadcast for the youth event of the 39th annual MLK Day celebration, including interviews with the producer of the MLK Day Celebration Youth Committee's short film of high school-age students sharing about their activism and worldviews, and its director. Tune in on our live broadcast of the MLK Day Celebration March and Rally Monday the 18th at 11 a.m.
And there's a special broadcast going on live this Thursday at 6 p.m. King County Councilman Gurmay Zahile, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Executive Director Muget Gunegez, and guest panelists will discuss the racial, historical, and generational trauma combined with the effects of these tumultuous times on the mental health of Black people. Call in with your thoughts and opinions on the live RAR hotline at 206-290-9685. That's 206-290-9685.
This has been News Radio. This has been News on Radio Avenue Radio World. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Thank you, folks.